Welcome to the Happy Soul Podcast. My name is Melissa, and this is Sammy. We are diving deep into conversations that connect and inspire. Stories of resilience, triumph, and transformation. Stories that take us to the heart of human connection. Please note that opinions of our guests do not necessarily reflect those of this podcast. Please listen with your kindness and an open mind. Each story shared is authentic and vulnerable. Let's embrace our differences with empathy, knowing every voice enriches us. Together, let's cultivate a community of respect and curiosity. Thank you for listening. Now sit back, relax, and prepare to be inspired.
Welcome to the Happy Soul Podcast, everybody. Today we are here with Susan Johnson. Susan actually came to, well, she didn't come to us, but her name came to us through people we were speaking with for our Childhood Cancer Awareness Month mini-series that we have going on in September. Her name came up twice from two different people. One who had very intensely followed along with the information that she provided, one that had also kind of just picked pieces out of some of the information that she provided. And we were so intrigued with how passionate they were about the information that you provided with that we wanted to deep dive into your page as well, where we started to learn about you and then reached out to have you on the podcast. And from what we understand about your story, we don't know the whole story, but your son was diagnosed when he was almost 3 years old with cancer. You were already a nutritionist, and that kind of shifted the direction with your nutrition in helping people learn how to thrive through cancer. Is that accurate?
Yep, that's accurate.
Yeah. And so like, we're so curious to hear so much about like how this has gone for you, how this route came, all the little nuances of how you're helping people, and reading some of the causes with your mission, with everything that you've got going on. It sounds incredible. But we want to ask you about this today, which was something that you chatted about before we started recording, was how much work and what it takes to maintain a healthy relationship in the midst of a crisis situation. And so you were speaking that that's something that's come up recently for you guys. And I would love to hear like your thoughts on that topic and just kind of shoot us off in that direction today.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I always like a platform to just give people hope in the midst of their journey, whether they have a child with cancer, they have cancer, or even just creating an environment cancer can't survive in, which I think should be every human on the planet, right? So, we walked through, as you alluded to, cancer with my son he was in active treatment for 3.5 years. And we realized, thankfully, my husband and I walked into this diagnosis with a healthy marriage. And it rocks the boat. For sure, when you're told that your child has this disease. And at that time, we didn't know many people that had cancer, and the ones that we did had died. And it was just really scary. And so you can imagine the stress. They say statistics talk about finances lead to divorce, moves lead to divorce, and grief. And there's a massive amount of grief that happens when your child is diagnosed with cancer. And so as we walked through this, even the first week out of the hospital, once my son went into what we call induction, after initial treatment, we were out of the hospital. And I remember we went on our first date and we got in a huge fight. And it's not what I expected. Like, our first date, my sister was watching our kids. It was a big deal because I didn't want to be away from my son. And we just got in this huge fight. And I just remember being devastated. I actually went to bed that night on my knees in the living room, just praying that God would cover our marriage and save her. I'm like, I have my child has cancer. I can't lose my marriage. And I had this revelation over the course of the next few weeks that this is actually something that we have to fight for. We can't be passive in. And passivity, we know, leads to really nothing, right? Or death, essentially death of a marriage, death of a relationship. And we both knew that. We both knew we needed to be active and fighting and contending for our marriage. And, it was this realization that we chose each other first, and we still come first. And that's kind of hard when you have a child that's sick. You feel almost negligent, being like, well, we come first. We're priority before even our sick child. But that was essential. And we realized that was actually essential for him to heal. Because if he wasn't in a home feeling the love and connection between parents who, we were given this child, then his nervous system, like from a physical standpoint, his nervous system wouldn't heal, his immune system would be compromised. there are so many things that we know link the physical and the emotional, right? And so we had to choose each other first and then choose him. And again, it's not popular because you just think, oh, we go in crisis, we go to the victim. In this case, the victim was my son, but no, we had to choose us. And so there were definitely things we did, like regular date nights. We learned, this was a tip that we learned later on after he was done with treatment. And I wish I knew it before. And now I counsel our families that we work closely with. We learned to separate business meetings from date nights. So when it was like, we have to talk about finances, we need to talk about schedule, travel, appointments, whatever it is, we would sit down at the dinner table, and usually with a glass of wine, that always helped, and talk about it and make those decisions instead of waiting for our date night when we just want to hang out. And yes, serious things come up, of course, but we don't want to have those conversations on date night. So like separating that was really important.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, you're totally right. That's a huge thing. And I feel like we can mesh those two things together, and we forget that like you didn't date with those topics. Like you didn't get to know each other and fall in love having conversations with those heavy financial topics. They maybe came up, but they weren't the base of a conversation. And I'm sure there's so much extra stress going on when you have a child going through cancer treatment that like that's going to bring up a whole other level of emotions in date night that you also don't want. So so that's one piece of advice that you give to people. Can you walk us back to that first fight when that first happened? What did you guys do and shift after that first fight happened to improve the relationship? Like I guess I shouldn't say improve, to keep the relationship strong moving forward.
Yeah, that's a great question. And now in retrospect, I realize it was a total gift from God, like just my intuition of what we did next. But I'll explain to you what kind of triggered the fight. And this is one of the biggest issues, I think, probably in marriage, actually, is the way that men and women share their emotions and feel their emotions and live out their emotions. It's so different. So at the time, my husband was a law enforcement officer in California, and I was a holistic practitioner, but of course had closed my practice in this period of time to just take care of my son and my daughter. And so I was with the kids all day at home, and I was, tending to them, giving the supplements, giving him his chemo by mouth, taking him to clinic for the appointments. So I'm in this all day long, and my husband's out catching bad guys on the street and doing his work. And so when he came home, I wanted to talk about how I was feeling, how hard it was. I wanted to cry. I wanted to just let all of it out. And he wanted to come home to a happy household. Everything's put together and we're just moving forward. And he'll admit it wasn't fair. And it also wasn't fair for me to think that he could come home from work all day, which was super stressful in its own way, and for me to just dump on him. And so when I realized in that fight that a big part of it was like, well, you don't understand how I'm feeling. I don't even feel like you're worried or scared. And what ended up coming out at the end of the fight, still that evening, was he said, I get in my CHP, California Highway Patrol car every morning, and I sob on my entire drive to work. I cry the whole time season where there are tears on my wool suit and I'm embarrassed to walk into the office. And it just caught me off guard. And I'm like, oh, so you are feeling this, but you're handling it in a different way. And you don't want to do it in front of me, and you don't want to do it in the house in front of the kids, but you're still feeling it. And he then said, so when I come home, I've already felt it, and I just want us to be a happy family. Mm. And again, he will say, like, I know that's unrealistic because we're walking through a cancer journey, but the minute that I realized we are both processing totally differently, and I need to make space for him and he needs to make space for me, is when we made that change. And I'll tell you what we did. And this was, again, must have been just God's like whisper to my spirit. And by the way, I'm a holistic nutritionist, so this is comical that this was what I did. So we wake up the next morning, and at this period of time, we're temporarily relocated in LA. Okay. At the time we were living in Mammoth Lakes, which is a ski mountain town about 4 hours north. So we're in LA, and we went to bed separately, which to this day, like, I think there's 2 times in our 20 years of marriage we've ever slept apart because of a fight or argument. That's just something that Like as much as he'll want too many nights, I'm like, no, you can't, we can't do this. So we slept apart, big deal. And morning, I woke him up at like 6 a.m. and I said, let's go get in the car. And he's like, what? And I was like, get in the car. And so we get in the car and, he's kind of looking at me and I drive. I wouldn't tell him where we were going, but he was really trusting actually after a fight. I mean, I don't know. He also, he was a cop, so I'm sure he had a gun somewhere in case. So he's totally trusting me. And I drive him to Dunkin' Donuts. No, not Dunkin' Donuts. Krispy Kreme. He loved Krispy Kreme. I remember when we were in college when we met, he loved Krispy Kreme, but I'm a holistic nutritionist. Nobody in my family is allowed to eat donuts. Like, duh, right? But I knew he loved him. And so I drove to Krispy Kreme. He's like, why are we here? And I said, because we're going to have a donut for breakfast. And I think he looked at me like a demon spirit has come over my wife. I'm not sure what's happening. And I said, no, babe, I'm super serious. Like, we're going to go have a donut. We walked in, we had a donut. Both of us, honestly, within 30 minutes had like sweats. We felt horrible. And I was like, oh, thank you, Jesus. You let him feel bad after this. Now he realizes why he doesn't eat him. But anyways, all that to said, the whole point of that was me learning that I needed to release a little bit of control over some of the things that he still found joy in and being willing to compromise because we had a bigger battle to fight. And so for me to just show him, listen, like we're just going to do this. It's something you enjoy. Let's just go for it. And it was a way that it was kind of a peace offering, but it meant a lot more in the long run for me to just relinquish a little bit of control and realize like we have a bigger battle to fight. Let's find joy in just the silly, unhealthy moment of a donut.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that so much.
Same. I just think that's incredible, Season, because like I'm not a holistic nutritionist, but I was a personal trainer for a long time and have like a very minor nutrition background, nothing intense. So it does speak a lot, right? And if we try to control everything that they do, like it takes away from that piece. So speaking on giving that moment of like, okay, I'm going to release this control here. This is something that we need to enjoy. How has that, so that was one time, how has that gone through with the relationship? Like, has that continued in certain ways? Or did that just kind of help heal that and like move on in that situation? What did that look like for the two of you?
Well, I am a proclaimed control freak, so it is a constant work in progress. But yeah, it really set the tone for just walking in through a diagnosis where you feel completely out of control. And, you're just waiting every appointment, praying to God they won't tell you the cancer's back or that, something's wrong. And so you truly feel out of control. And so it was a helpful way to step into the beginning stages of this diagnosis, learning that I couldn't control everything. And then there were some things I could, and that's what we teach our families, right? Is the things they can control, we teach them how to do that, but to relinquish what they can't. And so to this day, I mean, I've learned, it was also a helpful lesson of submission. And I want him to lead our home. I want him to lead our family. And so I can't be a total control freak if I want my husband to lead the home. And so it was a helpful kind of directional shift. Not that it wasn't before, but just to be reminded that he'll call me out and he'll be like, Season, like just freaking let them have that, and like, you're right. It's not a big deal. But at the same time, he is absolutely on the same page as me with how we eat and what we do with our kids and holding them. He'll hold them accountable. He will also get Cheez-Its and Cheetos and Funyuns when he goes to a gas station. He'll do that once in a while as well. So while I'm much more mindful than he is, we're still on the same page, and he chose to trust me in that. But yeah, it is a constant work in progress because it's a matter of just, letting go and going like, is this the battle I want to fight today? Or is this not that big of a deal in the big picture?
Yeah. So how do you go about coaching with your clients and families that you work with on how to navigate that together? Like from those learnings that you took from your own learning in your relationship, how do you help other people apply that specifically? Because obviously not everybody's a control freak and not everybody has the same nutrition beliefs and all that kind of stuff. So how do you help people kind of put those things together for themselves?
That's a good question. And it's so challenging. I have a program where we support pediatric cancer families along, they're working with their oncology team. And then they work with us, myself and a functional medicine doctor, and we teach them about nutrition and detox and safe supplements that aren't contraindicated with treatment. And then we talk about healing their home environment. And we talk about our hearts and our hurts and our marriages. And so in those conversations, what we find is there are aspects of treatment, and this is a really concrete example. There's aspects of protocol for pediatric cancer that aren't necessarily required. So the chemotherapy, the steroids, surgery, those are all, and radiation for some cancers, those are all required. And by the way, just as a side note, if listeners don't know this, if you're under the age of 18, you are required by federal law in the United States to go through conventional cancer treatment. So you don't have the option to go to like an integrative clinic. It's crazy. So that's why we have this program, because these families aren't getting this education from their oncology team, right? We always say, trust the oncologist for the chemotherapy, the radiation, surgery. They know how to do that. And that will play a role. We're going to believe that that is helping your child heal. But your kid didn't get cancer because they were deficient in chemo, radiation, and surgery. So let's help their body heal. And so when we come into this with a family, there's optional, I shouldn't say optional because the doctor makes it seem required, but what we've learned and what I understand from biology is some of the treatments they recommend, let's say Miralax, which is a really toxic medication used to help with constipation. Even the bottle says don't give to kids under the age of like 8. And then it says don't use for more than like a week. It's crazy, but they'll tell you your kid can take it as long as they need to take it. So that's an example we'll use. That's not required. That's the doctor or nurse is giving it to them and saying like, here you go, use this. Here's where we see a problem arise within a marriage is one of the partners is not as involved in the active day-to-day treatment part where they're working closely with me and Dr. Pennick and working closely with the oncologist. So now let's use the example of what I see mostly is the moms. The moms are the active component in the treatment. Dads typically are the ones working, not always, but typically. So mom comes to dad and says, hey, we're not going to give her this anymore because it's A, not required, B, it's unhealthy. Dad's like, whoa, but the doctor said we needed to. Now dad's scared because he's logical and he has every right to question, right? He's logical. Doctor said to do it. What's going to happen to my kid if I don't? Mm-hmm. Mom's saying, trust me, I'm learning this. I have a better way. And there's immediate tension. And there's other medications that I won't say just for the sake of safety for my life. Just kidding. Not really, but kind of. That are not also required. And this comes up all the time. And so what it really comes down to, and my husband shares this so beautifully, is the inactive partner, and I don't mean they're inactive in the care of their child and the love for their child, of course, but they're typically the ones providing for the family. So they're not as present. So the inactive partner in the journey has to be willing to do one of two things: do the research themselves and then make an educated decision with their partner, or trust the person they married, knowing that they love their child just as much and they're not going to put their child in harm's way. And that's hard pill to swallow, right? Because there are certain decisions that you make that you're like, and the doctor will flat out tell you, and not all oncologists, there's some incredible ones out there, but some of them they put a lot of fear in you. Mm-hmm. Well, if you don't do this, this could happen. And then you're just like, what? Well, I'm not here to try to hurt my kid. So that's an example of just like helping. And I'm not a therapist. Oh my gosh, I'm the furthest from. I'm not an expert. I'm not perfect at this, but just gently providing them support in that. And then the beautiful thing is, like today, right before this, I just got off one of our calls, and the biggest part of our group is the community. I learned. I thought the best part was all the health advice and specific individual support. They're like, no, it's the community. So you've got two couples that were on the call that are going to connect after the call, because they're walking through the exact same thing and they have the same questions. And so they can go to each other and get support from each other as well.
Wow. Oh my gosh. My mind you just blew my mind on something, because this was one of my questions I had written down to ask you. It was written like I had to write this down because I just had this thought as I was like going through my morning and kind of preparing for this conversation, and I'm just thinking about all the things that I want to talk to you about. And one of the things I wrote down, now I'm looking at it completely differently because I'm looking at it from a relationship standpoint. So I'm going to try and say this in some sort of eloquence. It might take me a couple fumbles here, but I wanted to ask you about how do you find I don't know if balance is the right word, but how do you find that balance between trusting your healthcare providers and diving into a more natural and the nutritional side of things? And when those two things collide, where do you find that balance? And where do you know, okay, I have to just release and trust here. No, I have to dive in and learn here. But now we're talking about relationships, and there's this whole other aspect where you take something like, say me and my husband are going to argue about, I don't know, where we're going for vacation or something like that. And it's something kind of whatever frivolous, and we're arguing about it. But now it's so much bigger when you're talking about the life of your child. There is so much more on the line. You're going to have to learn how to communicate with each other on a whole other level because the stakes are so much higher. And now you have this whole thing about balancing between healthcare provider and finding your own path and how to meld those together. Like,
Yeah.
like, how do you find that balance? Where do you learn to just trust in your healthcare provider, and where do you go there? And then how do you take that to your partner? And like, that is a whole thing to navigate.
It's a whole thing to navigate. And this is the broken part of our system, right? So if I call a spade, the simplest way to look at it is understanding an oncologist. And there's a couple layers to this. A pediatric oncologist, number one, factual, was trained in medical school, which medical schools are funded by the pharmaceutical companies. They develop and they fund medical school. So medical school, yes, pharma backs medical school. That's why doctors are trained they know how to use medication. They do not have to go through nutrition. In fact, I cannot confirm this. I just received a message from a colleague who is a medical doctor last week that said, I just saw in papers that pediatric oncologists are no longer to go through any nutrition training whatsoever. Now, as it is, doctors only have nutrition as an elective, and it's usually about 8 hours of education. Correct. And it could be give or take a few. So if we call a spade, an oncologist goes to medical school, which is funded by pharmaceutical companies. They get no training on nutrition or herbs or supplements or detox, none of that. They learn how to use medicine to effectively treat disease. Number two, the second layer is a person doesn't decide to become a pediatric oncologist to screw with people. They step into this field because they deeply care. Like, kudos to them. It is a hard job. Like, I can't imagine. You're not just taking on a sick child, you're taking on a family that is broken and terrified, and emotions are high. And it's just such a hard job. So that's the two layers to understand. So we're looking at it factually. This is their training. So we literally, like, I've called them, they're a chemotherapist, a radiologist, a surgeon. That's what they do. So if we look at that, then we need a team. Like in any type of a healing experience, you need a team. There's not just a one person that could do everything. And if we just understand common sense, like I mentioned earlier, you don't get cancer because you were deficient in chemo, radiation, surgery. You get cancer because something went wrong in your body. And while I believe it's multiple things that could trigger it, genes play a small role, but typically it's environmental. So let's support the body while they're going through chemotherapy with healthy food, gentle detox, supplementation. You know, one of the studies that you could read, you could find it anywhere, is chemotherapy depletes your body of magnesium. Magnesium is needed by almost every organ in your body. So supplement magnesium. And cleaning up the environment in your home, getting rid of the toxic chemicals. So you need somebody that knows this, that is trained in this, right? This is where they got their training, is natural wellness. And then you have this team, and this is where it's broken, is they don't typically mesh. Because when I'm working with a family and I tell them how important nutrition is, and I recommend that they supplement with magnesium and they supplement with vitamin D, and they supplement with organ meats. Like there's pills that you can take so you don't have to chew on liver. Don't worry. You can supplement with organ meats. They go to their doctor and tell their doctor, and their doctor says that's super dangerous. Don't do it. And this is where the tension begins, because the parent is scared, and it's what we call it white coat syndrome. I experienced it too. I was a practitioner when my son got diagnosed. And that first couple of weeks, I was numb. I didn't know who to trust, what to do. I was terrified. And I had white coat syndrome, where I was like almost blindly like following what they said. And thankfully I had a husband and a team of colleagues who were like, no, we're doing this, and this alongside. But that's really what it comes down to, is knowing. It's just like if you're going to hire somebody, let's say you're hiring a contractor to build your house. I hope that you would ask what their experience is and what their training is. And you're not going to ask your contractor to all of a sudden become your chef, or you're not going to ask your roofer to become your electrician. Things could go real bad. Yeah. So that's really what it comes down to, is like recognizing who is what they know. And then you have to build a team around that.
Yeah. I always say that this was something when I was a trainer, I used to say to people all the time. And it was always that, like, there's all of these, like, Chinese medicine, Western medicine, nutrition, like chiropractics, osteopaths, like there's all of these modalities. And we, for some reason, idolize only the white coat doctors, where all of these actually need to work together and they need to figure it out. And even my own personal medical doctor, she stepped away from doctoring here. We're up in Canada. She stepped away because she was like, I'm so lidded. I know that there's more than what I know, but I can get in so much trouble for recommending beyond what I know. And it's so heartbreaking. She's like, I'm so lidded and I don't want to be lidded anymore. I want to actually help people, and I can't do that as a doctor. And it's like, it's so wild how much it's lidded. But also, like, when you were saying that the doctor was like, that's so dangerous, you want to be like, pause. How safe is chemo? Would we just go... Like, yes, it's going to cure the cancer, but would we just go give chemo to anybody? No, but I could give liver to anybody.
They're suited up in what it looks like biochemical warfare. That's how they look when they come in and give your kid chemo. And they're like, don't give them essential oils, though. It's super dangerous. And what I've taught my families to say is, you don't say, can I give my child this? Or can I do this? You say, tell me why I shouldn't. And then you shut them up in the most respectful way.
Yeah.
Unless they're educated. And again, my point is, there are some awesome educated, or at least, and I mean educated in this stuff, the natural side, or at least open to education and in what we're doing. And we actually have a couple of really big meetings with some pediatric hospitals, one in Florida, and one potentially in Houston, that are like, we're seeing the kids you're helping and they are thriving. What are you doing? We are now open, so that's huge. So it's like hospital to hospital, right? So you will have those doctors that are like, we need to work together. We need to merge all of the medicines. And then you're just still going to have the ones that are trained by the book, and they're not willing to veer off. And whether it's ego or fear of the unknown, or control, wanting to have ultimate control over the beginning and end of treatment, which I understand, like whatever the reason is, they just aren't willing to budge.
Totally. Yeah. That's so wild. Let's make a hypothetical here. Somebody's going in, they're just starting off this oncology journey. What's the ideal team? Tell me the ideal team of people around them.
So obviously, as a pediatric, you will have your oncologist and nurse practitioner. So that's assigned automatically. I always say that is something to also, you can choose. Like treat it again, like you're hiring somebody to build your house. I think you're going to be pretty picky. Same thing with the person caring for your child. Like you can get second and third opinions in building your team. And I will say one more thing to that is take a breath and take a minute. They will try to start you on chemo tomorrow when your child has a diagnosis. Only 2% of the time is it an emergency situation. Otherwise, you do have time. You have weeks, sometimes a month. So take a breath, take time, get second and third opinions on the oncology conventional team. And then you absolutely want a nutritionist, ideally a metabolically trained nutritionist, somebody that understands that cancer is a metabolic disease. And so somebody that understands how to approach diet that way. Typically somebody that's educated like that, like for me, for example, that is what I do. But over the last decade, I've also educated myself on supplements and herbs and essential oils and environmental toxicities, and different ways to support that. So a practitioner that can support nutrition and helping, get them on supplements as needed, teaching them how to clean their environment. I will say an additional support to this would be an osteopath. A good cranial sacral trained osteopath, somebody that can work with the body hands-on and help manipulate the body into basically knowing what it needs, where it needs support. And if this osteopath, finding somebody that can help, and typically osteopaths do, but again, you're questioning, they help support the vagus nerve, which has a lot to do with your nervous system and healing. So nutritionist, osteopath, and I would say a chiropractor. System or function affects structure, and structure affects function. One of my favorite stories of chiropractic care is a colleague of mine who's a chiropractor in LA. He had a woman come to him with she had Hashimoto's, which is a thyroid disease where that thyroid is just not really functioning. Literally, the only thing she did was cut gluten and coffee out, which I know that sounds kind of like horrible to cut out coffee, but she cut gluten and coffee out, went to a chiropractor. This chiropractor told her, like, I can help your thyroid just by adjusting you. She went into remission, didn't do anything else. Later, she changed her diet and she just started improving some things. But again, function is affected by your structure. And you think of it as like a kinked toes. That happens with your body and with your muscles and with your connective tissues. If it's kinked, you don't have energy flow, you don't have proper detox, you're not open, your pathways aren't open. And so chiropractic care is great. But again, it's the same type of thing, right? We have great chiropractors out there. And then we have some that people maybe had a bad experience. So interviewing your chiropractor. And then I would say the last person would be just having, I don't want to say therapist, because that, I think that title and that word could be very loose, but a spiritual, wise counselor to come alongside your family. It could be your pastor. It could be a small group leader. It could be a close friend that you just trust spiritually, that is committed to praying for your family, that you can have conversations with candidly, that you can trust your other children with, to just be like, hey, can you pray for them, or can you take them out for the day? I think that's a really important. And a lot of times and why I hesitate with saying therapy is because I know my husband, he'd be like, yeah, nope. I'm not going to talk to a therapist, or even my kids. Like, I think they'd be like, what? I don't want to talk to somebody, but a trusted, wise person that will pray and will be in relationship with you and walk through it with you.
Wow. I love that so much. I have this like visual of almost like a pie as I'm talking to a nutritionist, a graphical pie where you have like your section of like white coat to like, I don't know, white coat medical, your medical side, then you've got your nutritionist side, and then you've got your mental health side, like all of those pieces kind of working together in the house. I love that.
Yeah.
So wise. Sammy, you look like you're ready.
I've got like a million questions. We just not have enough time. I want to just circle back to something you were talking about in the relationship piece that I meant to bring up when you were, or like ask about when you were saying that, because you talk a lot about, this also ties into another question, but all the environmental factors that can play a part in a cancer diagnosis. And you talking about your guys' relationship being on par is what's going to help your kid heal because it creates a healthier environment. Can you speak, I don't know, if a little bit about just like how you would talk about that energy with someone if they're having a really tense relationship and how that can impact their kid? Because obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, to me it seems obvious that when there's tension between a relationship, kids pick up on that. But how that actually can impact their kid and their ability to heal and all of that kind of stuff. Are you able to speak on that?
Super important. I usually tell the story that when we were going through treatment, and this was actually Kicker's most intensive part of treatment, and it lasted about, gosh, I can't remember now. I want to say between 2 and 4 weeks. And it was definitely where he struggled the most. But there was this week in particular that he just wasn't doing good. His color was off, his energy was low, and he was 4 at the time, or 3, or no, he was 3. He just wasn't doing good. And I could sense it. And so we took the 4-hour drive to our osteopath and took him in to see Dr. Moreno. We get him on the table, and Dr. Moreno literally he's working on him, and he looks at Josh and I, and he goes, "Been a hard week, huh?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, it has. He hasn't been feeling good." And he goes, "No, I mean, between you guys, has it been hard in the home?" And I was like, I looked at Josh, and I was like, yeah. We had been in heavy conversation about possibly moving, maybe a job change for Josh. He was thinking of resigning. And we'd been arguing, and it was just tense in our home for a week. And I said, "Yeah, it has." And he goes, "That's why he's like this." And he didn't say it in an accusing way. That made it sound very like pointing fingers. He just said, "Feeling your energy from that, and his body is not able to push it out. Like he's just struggling because he's carrying the emotion and the weight of what you guys have been talking about and having conversation." And we don't hide things. Like I mean, my kids have heard us yell. Like we are not let's go behind closed doors and shut the door. I mean, kudos if you could do that. But you will know if I'm upset just by my face. I can't hide it. Like Josh will be like, "Change your face." I'm like, "I can't." So we're in this room, and he says this, and it was a light bulb moment of realizing that. And so if you really think about the science of it, we are energetic beings. Like God created us as energetic beings. So some people know this because they're very sensitive. You might have a friend, or you might be that person that walks in a room and you immediately can feel everybody's energy, or you can sense read the room and feel the energy in the room. Now, I'm not really like that. I think as I've become older and maybe a little bit wiser, I do sense and feel people's energy a little bit. But for the most part, kids are not, they don't walk in a room necessarily and like, "Oh, wow, this is a real dark space." That's not typically how they operate. But from an energetic standpoint, they absolutely are picking up on our mood, on our energy. And they're not dumb. Like we were just having this conversation, my husband and I, about a couple that we know that's struggling in their marriage and trying to hide it from their kids. And I was telling Josh, I said, kids aren't dumb. They know. They can pick it up. Like they're so intelligent and they're so intuitive because they're still so immature and young. And I always say they're still so close to Jesus. They were with him the most recent. So they just have this intuition. And they're able to just pick up our energy. And so our stress and our energy is absolutely transmitted to them. And I hate that because it makes you as a parent feel guilty, but it's also empowering. It's like the reality of a childhood cancer diagnosis. I always have to tell parents, it wasn't your fault. You don't have enough power to give your kid cancer, just like you don't have enough power to save them. And as hard as it is to say that, it should be like just free, like, "Okay, Lord, take the wheel." Like, I know I can give them quality of life. That's why we can't be passive. I know I can do all these things. I can give them good food. I can supplement them. I can detox them, and it will make them feel good and give them quality of life. But at the end of the day, I didn't have the power to give them cancer. I don't have the power to take it away. But we can make decisions every single day that is contributing to their health and their well-being. And, I remind parents, it's not your fault, but also when we realize there are things that we can do or we did do that turned on a genetic SNP that I should say a genetic expression that made this child more likely to get cancer. It's not a guilt thing, it's empowering, because it's like, oh my gosh, okay, that could have been one of the triggers. So let's undo that, or let's change that. So it's the same with stress. Now I know that this is affecting my kid. Awesome. Okay. I feel bad, but I'm not going to live in that. Now I'm going to change, and I'm going to make my decisions moving forward based on that information.
Yeah. Oh man, that's so good, Susan. You said something about it earlier and I meant to ask about it, and I'm so glad I re-asked about it, because yeah, I mean, any kid, I mean, think about when you were a kid. I'm sure you knew when your parents were having a fight or when they were mad at each other. Like, you just walked in there and you're like, oh, someone's in trouble. You don't really know what's up. You don't know how to, you're not putting those words in there, but you know that you're walking in a little bit more on tiptoes than you do most days, right? And so obviously when a kid's also battling cancer, like they're picking up that energy, but their body's doing so many other things that they can't, it's different, right? Yeah.
Totally.
Dang. I'm just like, holy, I'm going to rewind that and listen to about 1,800 times. I love what you just said.
So
that
good.
is massively empowering as a parent of any child.
Yeah.
You know, like definitely for oncology parents, but also all parents. Like,
Yeah.
do people come to you that are 100% of your clients oncology families, or is that a large percentage of your clients?
The program is specifically for pediatric oncology families, and it's just to protect this space. It's such a gentle, tender space. Now, while, my podcast and my website and my social media, everything, and I always say this, everything I teach is absolutely applicable to every human being. Like,
Oh yeah.
the whole idea is we are trying to create an environment cancer can no longer live in, or we're trying to create an environment cancer can't come into.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of the practices and what I teach is applicable to anybody. However, in the group and who I work with right now, at least, is just the pediatric cancer families.
Mm-hmm.
But what I teach them, what you're doing with your kid, do with your whole family.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter was 4 when Kicker was diagnosed. And we basically, with the exception of a few things that were like, she didn't need, but we basically had her on a very similar protocol for 2 reasons. One, we knew everything we were doing for Kicker was something we all could benefit from. And 2, we wanted her to feel a part of it, like not to feel like it's already very hard for the other sibling. They feel neglected. And so we wanted her to feel cared for and feel a part of it as well. So yeah, everything I teach is applicable to the whole family.
Awesome. I just got goosebumps, Sammy. I just then I'm gonna let you in there. I just got goosebumps because I just realized in our conversations with oncology families, one of the things that comes through in these conversations that is very stressful is that the medical team has a plan. They have a timeline. When that timeline is done, it's like this unknown void of now what? Where your team, this knowledge, this is for life. This support that people get from you is for your life. Like, this isn't a small window. This is something you can live like forever.
Absolutely.
I mean, dang.
And we still have, Kicker and our whole family on a lot of the protocol that we did during treatment. And we know if you had cancer, you're more susceptible to getting it again.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we need to do everything we can to be active in that battle of keeping it away. And so that is something, Melissa, that families, it's so sad, but it's true that when you end treatment, everybody around you is celebrating and they're so excited for you. And as a parent, you are terrified because this is completely uncharted territory. It's now a possibility because it's happened before. You know that relapse is possible, which is the recurrence of cancer. You are now not under even if you hated being in conventional treatment and you just didn't love going to the appointments, there's something comfortable in being under constant care from that oncology team. And so now they're like, cancer free on your way. And it is really terrifying for the families that haven't been exposed to, not, and most of them, it's just because they didn't know better, but have been exposed to all these things that we teach, because they truly are walking into this like, oh my gosh, now what? But you're right. What we teach is something we carry on. And we're actually working on developing a remission program that will be specific to just our pediatric cancer families that go into remission and are done with active treatment, because that's actually where we can really go all in on healing, and we don't have to worry about any contraindications with certain supplements and things like that. So we're developing that. We're hoping to roll it out by the end of the year, but it's a big part of it, as well as that second phase.
So good.
Yeah, so good. Oh my gosh, I wish we had so much longer. I really want to ask this question because when I first came to your page, obviously not in your program, not with a cancer diagnosis, I came to your page and there's so much incredible information in there about switching things and changing supplements and all this kind of stuff. If someone was to come and they start getting information from you, and obviously somebody in who's had a recent cancer diagnosis probably is already feeling very overwhelmed with all of the information that they're getting. So if someone's lifestyle is like the complete opposite of a nutritionist lifestyle, and now they're trying to come into taking on a lot of the advice that you give them, where would you start someone? Where do you say, okay, I know this is overwhelming. Let's baseline it here. Let's draw back to very simple things that are simple to switch. Where would be that starting point for someone who's like obviously very opposite of your like typical lifestyle?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We do have families that come in that are like that, where they're like, we're the McDonald's family. So here we are, and there's different angles I take, and just having conversation with the family, and I just intuitively kind of understanding, reading the room, I guess. But if we're talking about nutrition, because I do believe that's the foundation. One of the things I just say is, let's just start with breakfast. I don't want you to think about anything else. Nothing else matters right now. We don't care about dinner tomorrow. I don't care about lunch today. I want you to think about breakfast. Tell me what your kid likes to eat. And I can find something. I don't care how unhealthy the kid is. I will find something that they can eat that is a replication of what they were used to. So for example, let's say they love chicken nuggets. Who said we couldn't have chicken nuggets for breakfast? A. But B, there are great healthy ways to make chicken nuggets. You can do it. One of our favorite recipes is, of course, organic chicken. And you can in America, you can buy the prepackaged. I live in Mexico, so I say that because we don't have it here. You can buy the prepackaged chicken tenders that are organic, that are raw. And then you crack an egg, you mix some almond flour and shredded unsweetened coconut together. And you can fry it in coconut oil, and now you have chicken tenders that are healthier, right? So when I say I can have a solution for you, like there are options, but I basically say start with breakfast. And yes, is this a little bit more urgent because your child is in active treatment and we want to be really careful to protect their immune system and make sure they don't have side effects from treatment. So do they ideally want to work a little bit more rapidly than, let's say, you came in and just wanted to help your family improve their health? But I say start with breakfast, and we talk about what they can replace, because the minute you just start pulling things away, panic sets in, right? No cereal. Okay. Well, instead of saying no cereal, I always just say, tell me what your kid likes to eat. And we'll put together an idea of what you can start giving them. And it's so tricky because kids are inherently picky, but also chemo changes your taste buds. And so that one day they will be totally on board with what you made, and it's something they loved yesterday. And then all of a sudden today they are wanting to vomit when you bring it out to them. And so we're really working with a very challenging situation. So it's constantly changing. And I always say, before somebody comes into the program, I ask them in our form that they fill out before they get on a call with my team to see if it's a good fit. Are you willing to spend time like in the kitchen? Or, I mean, some people maybe have means or support system that can help with that, but it is pretty important.
Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah, I totally agree. I just think it's like, I think when you find nutrition like that, when you don't know that world, it can be so overwhelming, and you can get lost in just going, it's too much, I'm out, right? And it's like, no, you just pick one thing for a week, and then we'll pick another one thing, right? And you can do this
Yeah.
though. So I was just curious where your start point was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
There was a reel that you did, and then we'll let you go, Susan. But there was a reel that you did recently, and it was with your son looking at the ingredients in a store. And I was curious to ask, because I love how much you're empowering your kids for these ingredients and all that kind of stuff. It's something that I do with my kids, but they're younger and don't know this as much. But I want to know, like, when it came to switching from, like, your kids, obviously your kids are a bit younger, but if someone's kids regularly eat Smarties and you're like, okay, we're not going to have Smarties anymore. We're going to have, I can't remember what the other healthier version is called. We're going to have these, and here's why. Like, how do you teach a kid to recognize those things and to do it in a way so that they're not shaming other kids who don't have the same information?
That's funny you said shaming, because I will not forget. Kicker was probably 4. We were in line at the grocery store, and he's in active treatment at this point. And this kid behind us or in front of us, I don't remember. I tried to block the whole thing out of my head. Had picked up, in the grocery store, they have like all the candy bars right there, which, by the way, those companies pay millions of dollars for that location.
Product
Crazy.
placement, my friend. Product placement.
Yes,
Yeah.
product placement. Man, just understanding the way grocery stores are set up and the profit involved. Oh my gosh, it's crazy. Anyways, we're standing in line. Kicker sees this little kid that's probably 6 or 7, I guess, grab a Snickers bar and a bag of M&Ms. And he turns around and looks at me, and I'm like, oh dear Jesus, please don't say anything. And he's not like typically like just like says things, but I could tell there was like this intuition, and he looks at the kid and he goes, that's not healthy. That's really bad. You'll get fat and maybe have cancer. And I'm like, and I see the mom, and I've never said you're going to get fat. Like, I've got a 4-year-old kid with cancer. Like, maybe he's overheard it. I don't know. But I just look at the mom, and I don't even know if I said, I really tried to block it out. But I remember the kid just kind of like looked at him and like looked down. It was like, looked like he was going to cry. Yeah. So that was a moment of shame for sure. So how have we come back from that situation? It really came to, and this is what I teach my families. It's not about saying no, it's about saying why not. So when your child wants let's talk about Prime. Prime is a popular drink. A lot of the teenagers, a lot of the kids my son's age think it's so cool. They've done a great job with marketing. So he wants Prime. And I said, okay, would you be willing to sit down and let's look at the ingredients? And I will tell you, he's wise because he's fought for his life. So kids with cancer have a different spirit about them. Typically, it's like they know what it's like to fight for their life. And so I think they're typically a little bit more open to change. But even my daughter. So we'll look at Prime, and I tell him, I read the ingredients, or I have him read it. And I explain the ingredients in there that are not good and why. And with Prime, I would let him have one every once in a while. It was like a big deal. And when I took the time to explain that to him, he doesn't even ask anymore. So it's more about educating your kids. So it's so much easier to just say no. And when they want something, no. But instead it's saying, why not? So if you don't want to have a Snickers, or I'm going to say no to the Snickers bar, here's why. It has this in there, and this is not good for this. And you said the shame word too. And I think there's this delicate thing that line to tread of, you should have seen the nasty messages I got from that reel because it went super viral. Oh my gosh. So many horrible messages, like your kids are going to have an eating disorder, all these things. So there is a fine line, but it comes from the parent. Like, I don't tell my kids that don't eat this, you're going to get fat. I say, don't eat this because it will cause your cells to break down, and your cells are what help your brain think. Your cells are what help build your muscle so you can surf. Your cells are what actually help you have a happy attitude, and so it's more about empowerment with education rather than like shaming them, essentially. And it is a work in progress. Like, I still work with my kids. My daughter's 15. She wants more autonomy, but she sees the direct relationship to her skin if she's eating poorly, and she's recognized that. And I've connected the dots. Like, I have said, hey, you told me you don't like that your forehead's breaking out. Do you want to know what will help? And I say, avoid seed oils, and that's going to help. And she knows. And she doesn't always want to be like, okay. she doesn't always agree with me. She kind of rolls her eyes and walks away, but she connects the dots, and then later on we'll be receptive.
Yeah, totally. I mean, why, if we can educate people about smoking in an education way of why not to do it, why can't we treat food the exact same way? Because there are foods that are very similar. And then make your choice. You've got the information and you know what's causing it. Yeah.
Exactly.
I just was curious because kids can accidentally be shameful with other people, right? Like just like your son was a 4-year-old, it can be very shameful with no intention of hard doing,
Oh,
right? But they can totally do it. So
yeah.
thank you so much, Season. It
Oh my
was so
gosh.
great chatting with you. Thank you for your time, for giving it to strangers that you don't know, that are a whole country apart from each other. Really
No,
appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Like I said, to be able to share just hope. And if I have a really specific goal for 2024, and it's to impact the lives of 200,000 pediatric cancer families. And my vision of that is it's not really trackable, because my thought is, if I just was able to give hope to a family that listened to a podcast like this, or saw a reel that I did, like that to me is impact. Like I just want to give hope. So I'm thankful that you asked me to come on.
Well,
Amazing. That's
thank you so
amazing. We
much.
love it. Thank you so much. We're so grateful. I have so many, I have like a whole thing of takeaways over here.
Good.
So
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. To help support the growth of this podcast, please feel free to leave us a review, follow us on socials, or recommend us to your friends. Your support honestly means the world to us. With love, Sammy and Melissa.